I am hoping that our next session that we do in May, for anybody that was here last month, we talked, our topic was housing. And so we'll do another housing one, and it will probably be on a Friday just because of the speakers' availability. This one will be on the state rental assistance program. It will be very hands-on. It's something that they should be coming to Loudon in the very near future. So I want to do a really hands-on presentation to encourage families to take advantage of it, to encourage individuals to take advantage of it. They really do need to know how to walk through the process, how to fill out the forms, what the financial picture looks like for somebody taking advantage of that program. So more to come on that. Today's presentation is on Medicaid waivers. So Lucy Beadnell is the Director of Advocacy at the ARC of Northern Virginia, and we do futures planning in conjunction with ARC of Northern Virginia. Usually Tia Marcelli is here, and she is the Director of Trust. She is unable to make it today, but she should be here the next time we meet. If anybody ever wants to do an individual consultation with her about special needs trusts, you can go through her directly at the ARC of Northern Virginia. You can always go to their office in Merrifield, but if you want to set up an appointment in Loudon, it's usually once a month in conjunction with the dates that she's out here. So you're welcome to email me directly and I'll help schedule that appointment with you. The handouts today, you have a PowerPoint presentation that Lucy's going to do. The next one is a great form, a great resource that Lucy put together that I updated with Loudon, and now I have a new little update that I will tweak it with for Loudon. But it talks about the CCC Plus waiver and the path you go for that, and it talks about the developmental disability waivers and the path you go for that, and the phone numbers that you call. The next handout is about the Department of Justice Settlement Agreement, and that topic came up in our last presentation on housing and looking at who that population actually is. And Emily Gebhardt, who is in the audience today, she is a supervisor with Loudon County's Mental Health Substance Abuse Developmental Services. She's one of the developmental services supervisors. And I just thought it would be great to have somebody in the audience that was Loudon specific. So if you have questions about Loudon, she is more than willing to try to answer them for you. But she provided us this settlement agreement information. I think it's a really helpful kind of quick read about that. And then the last piece is a kind of checklist of the 3 developmental disability waivers and the services that come under each one of those. And then these other handouts are really just specific to us at the ARC of Loudon. For anybody who has an adult in the community who has a disability, we have started doing, our goal is twice a year. We're actually going to offer it 3 times this year. We're doing something called Pathways to the Community, and it is a program to help adults with disabilities who are more independent in the community to talk about safety. And so the Sheriff's Department participates in it to talk about personal safety. We do an internet safety piece of it. We have 2 attorneys that come in and talk about Miranda rights and how to protect yourself. We provide lunch and breakfast items, and it's like a real all-day legitimate conference kind of thing where they register and everybody who registers gets an ID card that has their name, their address, and emergency contact. On the back of it, it has rights like I have the right to an attorney, I don't want to answer your questions, I don't consent to a search. It has some really basic information that somebody could, with telling an officer that you're pulling something out of your pocket, could show somebody to kind of ensure that they've actually communicated that they have a disability, because that's not the first thing that people think of sharing. So we do those, and the next one is coming up on Saturday, April 27th, but the registrations are open for that. On May 11th, which is a Saturday, we're going to have a big event called Music at the Manor. That flyer is here, but in the morning I'm doing some kind of free activities in this building and just outside the building. We will have Women Giving Back will be providing us clothing, so clothing for women and children that'll be free. Loudon Hunger Relief will be here with their vehicle. They'll be giving out food. DMV Mobile Unit, which is not free, will be here, but they will be doing DMV services, and they can do all DMV services in that vehicle. So anybody with or without a disability is welcome to come and take advantage of those DMV services, and that'll be from 9 to 11. And there'll be a flyer coming out soon about that if you're on our email list, you will get electronically. If you signed in today, we can also add you to our email list if you're not getting those, so that you'll get information from us. And then lastly, we do an I Can Bike camp in the summer at Tuscarora high school. It'll be the last full week in June, and it is to teach, I say children, but we actually can have adults participate in that program, but it's to teach individuals with disabilities how to ride a bike. And it's a week-long camp, and it actually is really fun. So if you know anybody who might want to do that camp, or if you know anybody who might want to volunteer to help with that camp, we do need 2 volunteers for every rider, and there are 40 riders, so we need 80 volunteers a day, or 80 slots filled with people who can walk quickly or run with those riders. So it's exhausting the whole week, but it is really fun, and it's a really rewarding thing to watch too. Anyway, so I will stop talking. I'm going to turn it over to Lucy. But Lucy, thank you for being here.
Yeah, oh, my pleasure. So I'll be talking today mostly about Medicaid waivers, and then a little bit as they touch on other kinds of programs. We'll go into those a little bit. So a little bit about the ARC of Northern Virginia. As I alluded to, we're a sister chapter. So our core footprint is Arlington, Alexandria City, Fairfax City, and the City of Falls Church. But our chapter is a little bit different in nature, though the same in mission as the ARC of Lab, so we share things. So our chapter's been around for 57 years, and a lot of our focus is on grassroots advocacy. So making sure that people with disabilities and the people who care about them know what's going on, and we encourage them and help them take action. So speak with legislators in Richmond, give testimony, write letters, those kinds of things to make sure that they're actively involved and having a say in the way that our politics and budgeting are going to go. We do lots of education, which would be things like this, and information and referral, so answering direct questions. We have a 24-hour-a-day Ask the ARC portal, so you put in a question and you get an immediate response with some kind of like quick links to things, and then someone on staff, who is me, follows up with you and says, oh, I got your question, like let's talk through some things, you're welcome to get back to me anytime if you have any other kinds of questions, let me help you find what you need, those sorts of things. We've got about 100 videos from 3 minutes to 3 hours long, I think, on YouTube that are all updated with, you know, facts, fast facts or 3-minute webinars on waivers or the waiting list or Social Security or those kinds of basics, all the way through like really in-depth topics like safety and justice kinds of things that Eileen was just alluding to. We are case managers for the developmental disability waivers. We do some folks here in Loudoun, a lot of folks in Fairfax, Falls Church, Arlington, Alexandria. We have a public guardianship of last resort program, a special needs trust that I'll allude to a little bit later as it ties in with waivers. And we have a beneficiary advocate on staff who's essentially a privately hired case manager, for lack of a better term. So sometimes families contact us and say like, this is overwhelming. Who is going to help me fill out all of this paperwork? Who's going to come check on my child when I'm not there anymore? Who's going to do all of these things that doesn't really fall under anybody else's purview? And that's the kind of job that is. And Caroline is extraordinary. Okay, so today here's kind of what we're going to walk through. Like ground level, what is the purpose of and description of a waiver? And then we'll look at a little bit how that process has been shaken up and that description has been shaken up since 2016 and 2017 for some of our waivers. So once we kind of understand what a waiver is big picture, then we're going to talk about eligibility for the waivers. Some services you can get, how to apply for the waivers that have a waiting list. We'll talk about navigating that. We'll talk very quickly about how the waivers are starting to intersect with our managed care system, this kind of change in Medicaid. A little bit about what's called the SIS, the Supports Intensity Scale, which is an assessment that you receive every 2 or 3 years, usually, if you have a waiver. We'll talk a little bit about a program called EPSDT, which is available for kids under 21 with Medicaid, and then we'll wrap up by talking a little bit about the ARC. So if you have questions as we go along, and it's about like what I'm talking about on that slide, like I don't understand what you said, or like can you repeat that or whatever, like ask it then. But otherwise, we tend to kind of get through things as we go through the flow of it all. Okay, so as promised, purpose and description of the waivers. So the general idea is waivers give states the flexibility to fund services in people's homes and communities. That's it. You're not waiving your right to anything, which is a question that I get a lot. So the term waiver has come up a lot more in the national news. So Virginia, for example, just expanded Medicaid, and Virginia's asking for a waiver to put a work requirement in with that. Waiver just means an exception to the general rules of Medicaid. So in this case, Medicaid says, if you're going to offer a service through Medicaid, here are the kinds of things you can offer and the people you can offer them to. And Virginia, and every single other state in the country, has said, we would like to offer some extra services to specific populations. We'd like a waiver of that rule of the way you do things, and we'd like to carve some extra services and supports out. So in this case, for people with developmental disabilities, we'd like to add in more robust services that the general Medicaid population can't access. All right, we talk about waivers a lot. They're essentially, in Virginia, the kind of one-stop shop for people with developmental disabilities. So when I'm answering those questions on that information and referral portal I talked about, sometimes parents say things to me like, I really just need some help here or there, like a little bit of rest, a little bit of a break. Now, some parents who say, I've got a kid who's really medically complicated. I need a nurse 24 hours a day. I need some really heavy-duty supports. And for all of those people and everybody in between, I say, we're going to look at waivers. They are meant to be lifelong supports, and in Virginia, they are really the only public funding stream, by which I mean free or low cost for the person with a disability, that have ongoing support services, right? This is where Virginia's put all its eggs in this basket. So if you want long-term supports for living in your own home, working, nursing, all those kinds of things, waiver is your answer. All right, so this I think is important to understand. The waiver is a Virginia program. Like I said, all states have some version of the waiver. All states implement it a little bit differently. But we cost share that program with the federal government. And in Virginia, we have a 50-50 match. So this matters a lot because when you're hearing things at the federal level about block granting or capping Medicaid or cuts to Medicaid, that can have a very significant impact to what's going to happen to our Medicaid waiver services in Virginia. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about waiver redesign and how the waivers got to be the way that they are today. So had you asked me prior to 2016, I would have said, Virginia has like all these different waivers and you kind of like navigate based upon your IQ score at a certain point in time, and you do this if you're that and that if you're this. And it was a pretty complex system for families to navigate. And I had families every single year who essentially had fallen through the cracks where people, through the holes that had been created in this patchwork system. And then in 2016, we underwent a redesign. And we went from having 3 waivers for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to having 3 waivers for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But they are different. They have different names, they function differently, and they flow a lot better together. So those 3 waivers are now called the Community Living Waiver, the Family and Individual Supports Waiver, and the Building Independence Waiver. So people, for obvious reasons, usually call them the CL, the FIS, and the BI waiver. For most of what we're talking about today, they're going to be functionally identical. That's part of the change. The way that people are eligible for these waivers, that you navigate the waiting list, that you do a lot of assessments for these waivers is the same now. So during our talk today, I'm mostly going to be calling them the 3 developmental disability or DD waivers, kind of a block. So think of those as one big bucket. Virginia also has a Commonwealth Coordinated Care, CCC, plus waiver. And this used to be called the EDCD waiver. That's a term that people were really familiar with. I'm going to be hearing EDCD waiver until I die. Or the tech waiver, and they were blended together in 2017. And then Virginia has an Alzheimer's assisted living waiver that also just got folded into this. So now if you can imagine, Virginia kind of has 2 buckets of waivers. These 3 developmental disability waivers and this single CCC plus waiver that's had all these other programs folded into it in the last few years. Got 2 kind of prongs here. So let's talk about those 2 different buckets. For the developmental disability waivers, you have to have a developmental disability diagnosis. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later, but for most folks in this room, yeah, they are. For CCC plus waiver, you need not only some kind of disability diagnosis, it may be a developmental disability, it could be something else, and also a significant medical need. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but just kind of now be kind of wrapping your head around how these 2 buckets of waivers are similar and different. The DD waivers offer a really robust menu of services for home and nursing and work and community. They are the alternative to the old institutional model that we had many, many decades ago when you had a child with a developmental disability and right from the hospital, they were scooted off toward the institution and maybe you never saw them again, right? It was cradle to grave services. So this waiver is meant to be that, right? Everything that someone would need across the lifespan, all kinds of supports. The CCC plus waiver is a nursing home diversion waiver. So it's not going to have services for things you wouldn't get in a nursing home. So in a nursing home, we don't usually expect people to be getting up and going to work during the day, right? Or getting pediatric services. So this is really aimed at personal care, hands-on help, nursing assistance. Again, nursing home kind of equivalent services, because tying back, this is for folks with a medical need. The DD waivers can offer up to 24/7 support if the person needs it. The CCC Plus waiver has a 56-hour-a-week cap on personal care. Sometimes, depending upon need, you can get some nursing hours on top of that, but again, not nearly as robust as the other. The DD waiver comes with a case manager, and Melissa was alluded to here in the room, who works for the Loudoun Community Services Board, where you have case managers. So that case manager's job, and I used to be a case manager, is to make sure you understand your waiver, you can use all of the pieces of the waiver to get the life that you want, and when the waiver doesn't get you there, we look at filling it in with other resources from the community, right? Building a whole life and support system around you. The CCC Plus waiver does not have a case manager. So a lot of families who use this end up becoming very savvy parents because you've got to navigate a whole lot on your own. So for all of those reasons, the DD waivers seem like the best place to be, but they have a very long waiting list, and we'll talk about that more in detail. And the CCC Plus waivers have no waiting list. So that's why we kind of talk about them both. And throughout the course of this presentation, with everything I talk about, eligibility and diagnosis and all those kinds of things, I'll go back and forth and say, for diagnosis, here's what you need for this set, here's what you need for this set. Because generally speaking, about a third to a quarter of people who qualify for this waiver also have a medical need that qualifies them over here. So it's really important for our population to understand that this is another resource if you're looking down at a really long waiting list.
Question, if you're on the CCC Plus, can you eventually move to the DD waivers?
Yes, and people do it literally every single day. All the time.
So you can't be on it both?
Correct,
Okay.
she's right, you're moving from one to
to
another. And it would make sense to be on both, and we'll look at services later, but there's no, you wouldn't want to. So for the DD waivers, like I mentioned, they were redesigned in 2016 from 3 waivers with different names to 3 waivers with new names. So we used to have this day support waiver, a DD waiver singular, I know this is confusing, they didn't consult me on the naming, and an ID waiver, right? And like I said, you kind of navigated between these 3 based upon your IQ score at a given age and some particular documentation and all kinds of things that were a little bit tricky. It was not at all based upon your need. So the idea of this redesign was we should really be giving people services based upon their need, which is a much better predictor of what they need than their IQ score, right? So the idea was we kind of morphed these 3. So then we ended up with this building independence waiver, which is aimed at adults 18 plus who are living reasonably independently. Maybe someone needs drop-in supports during the day, maybe they need supports when they're awake that they can be alone while they're sleeping, maybe they need drop-in supports a few times a week. But for our 10-ish% of our population who is pretty independent or working there, the DD waiver became the family and individual supports waiver. And this waiver is for young and old, living with family, living with friends, living on your own, everyone between drop-in supports and our community living waiver, which is designed for people who really need 24/7 care, by which I mean someone awake and able to touch you 24/7. This is not, oh, someone should be there in case a fire alarm goes off overnight, right? That's a different kind of thing. This person's gonna need tube feeding overnight. This person needs physical assistance to get to and from the bathroom multiple times a night, right? That's kind of what we're thinking about for this community living waiver here. So people with really complex physical needs, medical needs, hands-on care needs, behavioral needs, those kinds of things. So very roughly, we've got kind of 10-ish% of us, 80-ish% of us, and another 10-ish% of us. It's kind of how the state conceived of this working. And the big benefit of that was budgeting. So it used to be, when we looked at people who had waivers, and remember this waiver has a long waiting list, 80% of them almost were adults, with another 7% of them on top of that, over 65. So an older population, right? And a population that was obviously born a much longer time ago, right? So people who were less likely to request integrated services, more likely to have parents who are no longer able to provide care services, right? As all of us do as we age, we need a little bit more. The people on the waiting list were majority young children, with another 14% teenager, early 20th age. Different kinds of needs, right? Different kinds of requests. But when I would go to the General Assembly doing that grassroots advocacy I talked about, I would say, I would like a new waiver. And they would say, how much does a waiver cost? And I would say, well, the answer I have to give you is that if you look at this group of people who is using a waiver, it's $70,000 a year. And they go, oh golly, that's a lot of money. I'm not going to give you very many waivers. And it was maddening, right? So part of the idea behind this redesign was we would be able to go back and say, this waiver is probably going to cost you $70,000+ a year, but most people aren't going to need it. What I want a lot of is these middle tier waivers that can get us less than 24 hours a day active awake supports, but are what most people need. And I need some of these, which are super cheap. All right, so that was kind of the DD waiver redesign concept. Here's what happens when the CCC Plus waiver redesign. You went to bed on June 30th, 2017, and then you woke up the next day and your waiver had a new name. That was the process. In May of that year, I was on this conference call, and they were like, oh, we've decided to do this merger, and everyone was like, I'm sorry, what? And that was like it. So the reason I say I'm going to be hearing EDCD waiver for all of my days is there was no rebranding campaign. There was no big outreach. If you were receiving this waiver, you didn't so much as get a letter saying, your waiver's got a new name. That's how little change there was. It's like if you usually worked at the Elizabeth P. Smith Library, and then the next day you walked in and it was the John Q. Smith Library. It's like, all right, I guess this has a different name now, right? So the EDCD waiver and the tech waiver served very similar populations. As we mentioned, kind of people with some kind of disability and a medical diagnosis, and the tech waiver drilled down even further. It was people who were technology dependent to live. So tracheotomies, ventilators, those kinds of things were very common. This waiver had about 30 to 40,000 people using it, and this waiver had 300. And eventually the state Medicaid office said, do you know, it's actually a lot of work to administer a totally separate program for 300 people that really are very much the same as these people. Let's smoosh them together, because all but like one or two of the services here were available here, and all but one or two of the services here were available here. We were effectively running the same program twice. So when they smooshed them together and rebranded them, they said, all right, you all didn't have access to these 2 or 3 things before, and you didn't to these 2 or 3 things before, you can just have it all, right? Whatever you qualify. So they just found that it was more cost effective for these to be pushed together. So not a very fancy or exciting process, but pretty easy to understand is the upside. All right, so now we're going to work through eligibility, and I think of it in 3 prongs. Remember, we'll go back and forth between our DD waivers, that set of 3, and the CCC Plus waiver and all of these things. Because for all of them, you're going to need a qualifying diagnosis to meet the functional need and the financial criteria. So let's take a look at what that's like. For the developmental disability waivers, this is a lot of words to essentially say you probably already qualify if you think you have developmental disability, right? So you were diagnosed or had a disability manifest before 22. It's likely to continue indefinitely. If you're under 9, the criteria on that's even looser. But in 3 out of 8 life areas, things like taking care of yourself, communicating, being self-sufficient, managing behaviors, in 3 of these 8 domains, you need some significant assistance. For the CCC Plus waiver, it's a little more nuanced. So the criteria is significant medical need, and remember again, this is a nursing home diversion waiver. So I mentioned this waiver has like 40,000 people who use it. About 10% of those 40,000 have developmental disabilities. This waiver was not designed for us. So all the times I get calls from people saying like, this waiver should be different, this waiver isn't meeting our needs. And I was like, yes, but it's not really designed to, right? Our contract says this is a waiver to divert people from nursing homes, and sometimes our DD population happens to be able to work through and get services this way. So this waiver is never going to be kind of the robust sorts of services that the DD waiver is for that reason. The waiver here, there's no black and white list of these medical needs will qualify you and these medical needs will not. If you have someone with a heavy lift kind of a medical need, someone with a G-tube, someone with a very active seizure disorder, probably they're going to qualify, no problem. There's still no list that says that. If you have someone who has seizures once every 5 years and you don't do anything to monitor them, they are likely not going to qualify if that's the only medical thing you see going on. So this self-assessment, I think, is really very helpful. It's like 10 or 15 questions if you kind of check the box, right? Like I need help getting dressed, I need help going to the bathroom, I don't need help making food, blah, 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 and I need help with these kinds of medical things. And then it'll say, we think you are or are not likely to qualify. And so when I'm going through this, I just feel like that's a much easier place to start than me spending an hour saying, well, like, how often do they need therapy? How often? You know, I mean, like, it's a very, very gray area. And I wouldn't say that this is any kind of guarantee, but I've never had someone say to me that this assessment was grossly off. The enrollment process is the same that had been under that old EDCD waiver? Yeah.
Does this effectively cover like respite care?
Yes, and we'll talk a little bit about services here as we kind of move along, but it does. And there's kind of a new manual and some new rules under development, but really this is operating the same way that big EDCD waiver had been operating for decades now. Okay, so now, kind of have our diagnoses in our head. Let's think about functional eligibility. So for the DD waivers, they use a test called the VIDES, the Virginia Individual Developmental Disabilities Eligibility Survey, which is a mouthful, but very descriptive. That's exactly what it is. Eligibility for services in Virginia if you have a developmental disability. So I mentioned before, when we're talking about the definition of a disability, they're looking at 3 out of 8 life areas, right? 3 out of 8 of these life areas we're seeing in need. And they test that with the VIDES. So there's a version of the VIDES for 0 to day before you turn 3, and for 3 to day before you turn 18, and adults. And so it asks about those same kind of categories I talked about. Your health status, communication, the way that you learn and take care of yourself. So you'll go through this assessment and see, in 3 out of 8 of these life areas, do we have some kind of need? These VIDES tools are on our website, and I say to families often, like, just go get them, right? They're public documents. Read them ahead of time. The scoring guide is on the front page. It will tell you, in health status, if you answered, you need help often in this category, and never in this category, you qualify or you don't in health status, right? It helps you get familiar with it, because for many people, sitting down with a stranger talking about the intimate details of health status and using the bathroom and talking about someone's challenging behaviors is nerve-wracking. Also, sometimes we have a person with a disability who will say, I don't need help with this. I don't need help with anything. I can fly a rocket ship to the moon. I'm perfectly fine. I don't know why we are sitting here. And the ability to see that test ahead of time, walk them through it, explain to them what it's going to be like, talk about your plan for answering questions, giving examples that they're comfortable sharing is a great way to get prepared and be ready as possible as you can for that meeting. For the CCC Plus waiver, again, that eligibility piece is a little bit gray. They use this tool called the Uniform Assessment Instrument to test eligibility, whereas the VIDES has that scoring guide right on the front page. Like I said, like you could print it, you could fill it out yourself, you could say, yep, I'm pretty confident I'm going to qualify, or no, I am not. There's no scoring guide on this Uniform Assessment Instrument, but it is very repetitive. So if you often find yourself saying, yes, 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 that's a good clue that you are likely to qualify. And if you find yourself going through it saying, not really, I mean, no, probably not on this, probably not on this, probably not on this, probably not going to qualify, right? So that plus the self-assessment is a good bellwether for whether or not it's worth pursuing that avenue. So we've talked about diagnosis for eligibility, your functional needs for eligibility. Now let's talk about financial eligibility. Financial eligibility for Medicaid waiver Medicaid is different than you walk across the street, you go to your local Medicaid office and you try and apply for Medicaid. There are special rules for what's called long-term care. That means waiver. So the waiver Medicaid allows you to have up to 300% of the current supplemental security income, or SSI, Social Security benefit amount. So in 2019, that means per month, the person with the waiver can earn up to $2,313 and still keep their waiver. Once the person's earning more in today's dollars than $1,237 a month, they start to have a patient pay or a copay for their waiver services. So for example, someone may get $1,600 a month through their parents' Social Security income and their earned work income, and usually it's pretty much the amount between $1,237 a month and $1,600 a month that they have for that patient pay. You'll have someone who works it out with you exactly, but that's kind of a very rough idea about how it works. For adults receiving the waiver, they can't have more than $2,000 in resources at any given time. So that's things like checking account, savings account, stocks or bonds in your name, all kinds of things of that nature. If you push it all together, waiver coin collections is one of the things I always enumerate. For children, there is no resource limit because children legally don't own assets, right? Your 16-year-old doesn't legally own and have full rights to their bank account, right? But you want to be prepared because one day 16-year-olds turn into 18-year-olds. As of now, the parent income and resources never count in any form or fashion when determining waiver eligibility or patient pay, regardless of the age of the person applying. I will give a brief note here that in last year's General Assembly session, the state legislator said, hey Medicaid, what would it look like if we had a copay based upon parents' income? And I haven't seen anything about it since then. I'm only giving a brief side note here that don't say, well, like, 5 years ago, Lucy promised me that there was no patient pay based upon parent income. Like, don't take that to the grave, right? Like, this may one day change or be adjusted. There are some states that do it that way. I don't think Virginia's rapidly proceeding down that path, to say the very least. Okay, so here's a question that we get often. If I have applied for the waiver, does this mean I have applied for Medicaid? And no. In part because Virginia has a very long waiting list for waivers. So if you get on the waiting list for those DD waivers, that doesn't mean you automatically get Medicaid while you're on the waiting list or qualify for Medicaid while you're on the waiting list. It's just the way things go here in Virginia. So once you actually get that waiver, you get the call, you've made it to the top of the waiting list, you're getting services, then the person can get Medicaid and they get it under these special rules.
When you say long waiting list, 3 years, 10 years, 3 months?
We will talk about it in a lot more detail.
Okay.
I'm sorry, my allergies are trying to strangle me. I won't let them, but I'm stuffing. Okay, so financial eligibility. If the household income is too high for Medicaid, should the person still apply for a waiver? Yes, absolutely. If household income is very high, a minor child shouldn't just go apply for Medicaid, right? That's a different kind of program like we talked about. It's different when you're going through the door of a waiver than it is if you're just trying to apply for Medicaid, regular old health insurance, right? There's separate rules, those long-term care rules we talked about. And as, oh yeah.
For clarity,
Yeah.
you're saying it from the position of if you didn't qualify for Medicaid because of financial reasons, your child didn't qualify because of financial reasons, they still could potentially qualify for the waiver because it's bending the rules kind of
Yes,
thing.
exactly.
Let's say you were in the other position where
Okay.
your child absolutely qualified for Medicaid, is the bar, I'm assuming the bar essentially higher? So if they qualify for Medicaid, the likelihood of them applying for the waiver is,
And so the waiver is kind of two things. You're qualifying for the waiver because your needs, and also you have to show financially you're eligible. So if they're financially eligible for just regular old Medicaid, for sure they will be financially eligible for waiver Medicaid. No problem there. So before when I talked about asset limit of $2,000, that's not a whole lot of money. And that number has not been adjusted in many moons. So if you are a loved one with a developmental disability does not want to live in eternal poverty, there are some other options. You can put actual cash or assets like stocks or a house or all kinds of other things into a special needs trust or an ABLE account, which is something that people have heard a lot about that's relatively new in federal legislation. Special needs trusts have been around for a long time. Like Eileen mentioned, Tia from our office is routinely here and does kind of free consults. And Tia's pretty good at walking people through which would be more advantageous, and in some cases people have both. I mean, Tia's talk on special needs trust versus ABLE is like an hour and a half long, so like I couldn't begin to go down that road. But essentially, don't be scared off by the $2,000 asset limit. There are ways to make sure the person with a disability still has the chance to buy clothes or take a flight once a year to see their grandparents or save money for any kind of things that's important to them. All right, so now we'll talk about services. with the caveat that for each of these services, you've already qualified for the waiver at this point, if you're looking at your services menu, right? Then you have to qualify for the individual service. So let's say you qualify for your waiver and you have no medical needs, you're not going to qualify for hours of nursing care, right? Nor should you want to. So, as we look through services, you'll kind of be thinking whether or not this would be an appropriate fit for the person. So, this is, you don't have to read the words. I'm going through things in kind of very general terms, because once you actually get a waiver, you'll have very many meetings talking about this in a lot of detail. The community living, family and individual support, and building independence, remember our 3 chunks of DD waivers will be over here, and our CCC plus waiver is over here as we go through services. Kind of looking at the residential side, group homes that have 24/7 awake staff are available for people with a community living waiver because they have a 24/7 awake kind of need. Shared living, where someone with a disability lives with someone with or without a disability, who can help provide them supports in exchange for living there for free, is available under all 3 of these waivers, and in some cases you'll have that person who's there to be your kind of eyes and ears overnight, that person who's there if the doorbell rings at 2 in the morning, if the fire alarm goes off, if something quirky happens, you've got another safe person to help navigate those things, but maybe you bring in staff on top of that. Maybe use some other waiver services for the morning time and during work and in the evening time, all kinds of other things. That could be kind of a piece of your puzzle. Independent living is very much what it sounds like. For people who are living pretty independently, some support's brought in to make sure they're successful, unsurprisingly available just under the building independence waiver. There's a service called sponsored residential, where the person with a disability, this is a little wiggly, usually lives in the home of their sponsor, as they're called. So sponsors are often people like, for example, someone who used to manage a group home or used to be a special education teacher and says, yeah, it's cool with me if someone with a disability lives here. I'll receive some money for them kind of being a part of my life. The waiver will pay for them to go for work or their job supports or whatever it is during the day, and we'll kind of do things together the rest of the time. It's a very family-like atmosphere, very casual. A lot of people really like it. It's available under that community living waiver. And there's a service called supported living. So in that case, a service provider owns a residence, but whereas a group home tends to be 4 to 7 unrelated people of various ages and interests and abilities and a whole lot of staff that you don't choose and everybody's kind of rotating in and out over the course of the day. Supported living is that shrunk way, way down. So usually 1, 2, maybe 3 people living in an apartment or condo. Usually this model only works if the people know each other and like each other and want to live together in the first place, so there's a lot more of that kind of upfront vetting and pairing. Those sorts of things, and there can be up to 24/7 help in that model, or there could be less, kind of depending upon needs, whereas group homes, fire licensing, have people there 24/7. Okay, so day and employment services. In a nutshell, you have one of the developmental disability waivers. You have the big range of options for day and employment services. You can get essentially all of them. For the CCC plus waiver, you get the bulk, right? This is our nursing home diversion waiver. It's not having any kind of employment component. So it historically had been in Virginia that you were someone with a disability leaving the public school system, and you were looking at what you were going to do with your time afterward. Most people chose a day support model, which was generally a lot of people with disabilities go to a large building. There's paid staff there from Monday through Friday, 9 to 3, and you do activities, and maybe you get paid a few dollars an hour or a few cents an hour in some cases to do some kind of work, or maybe you don't get paid to do anything and you do life learning and those kinds of things. Virginia had a service called pre-vocational services, and then Virginia had supported employment services. The Department of Justice, who is 7 years now into a 10-year settlement agreement with us, found it rather curious that we had some people in pre-vocational services for 30 years, naturally begging the question, when does the vocation come, right? We are not doing a good job of moving people over to the other services. We have very, very few people in supported employment or individual employment. So, since 2016, that redesign I talked about, we've kind of been spreading out our menu of day and employment services. And this, I will say, exists more on paper than in reality, but is unfolding fairly fast, right? So now our service providers know maybe someone wants day support 1 day a week. That's their chill day, that's their life learning, that's their craft day, and maybe 1 day a week they're going out and doing this community coaching service. There's something really keeping them from being employed, a behavior that we're working around, whatever, and this will run forever until you are miraculously able to leap from one service to another. Okay, so all of the waivers now, we see our CCC plus waiver kind of getting on the map here, has some version of in-home services, meaning in the home of the person with a disability, in the home of their family members where they live, all kinds of twists on that, wherever they are living. So in-home support services that are really focused on skill building. So for example, if the person with a disability really wants to learn to make their own lunches, that person would be there charting, you know, like this day we made half the sandwich, but then we quit halfway between because cutting up the lettuce was too difficult, and here's what we're going to do the next day to get on board with that, those kinds of things. There's a companion service, which is someone staying with you one-on-one. Mostly you're okay, but maybe you have seizures, maybe you tend to wander off, maybe you can do a lot of things on your own, but we kind of have to have eyes and ears around. That's an option. There's respite care, to your question earlier about respite, and this is where 2 out of 3 of our waivers, including the CCC plus waiver, offer respite. So respite essentially means usually you need help this many hours a week, whatever that is, 5, 10, 100. And this week, things are a little bit different. Mom and dad are working late, are out of town, school is on spring break, your schedule or your caregiver schedule is somehow different and you need some extra. So people with those waivers have 480 annual hours of respite they can pull from and use to fill in those blanks, if you will.
How many hours was that again?
480 a year, and it's the same for all 3 waivers that happen. For environmental modifications, that's up to $5,000 per year to modify a home or a car for the primary benefit of the person with a disability. So widening doorways, making bathrooms accessible. The new regulations on this are a little tricky, we're trying to navigate through them, but historically speaking, I mean, I know people who got environmental modifications because they had Prader-Willi syndrome, which is when you're compulsively hungry, and it had keypad locks and alarms on kitchen cabinets, right, which is not something we would ever usually allow for someone with a disability to be barred from food, but if your disability makes it so, you cannot stop eating. Right? When I was a case manager, I had a woman with Prader-Willi who would say, like, I'm miserable. Right? Like, I don't want to be eating and I feel compelled to do this, right? So those kinds of things that were helpful. And a personal emergency response system, which is like, if you're going to be alone for any period of the day, a push-button necklace or bracelet that not only calls 911, but calls 911 and says, Jimmy is calling you, Jimmy has cerebral palsy, you may not be able to understand his speech, Jimmy has a heart condition, if Jimmy pushes this button, you need to have an ambulance there in X kind of minutes, sorts of thing. So it's really kind of like a smart profile and connection to 911 services. All right, so then we've got some community-based supports, and again, the DD waivers are pretty robust here. The CCC plus waiver is pretty light. The 3 DD waivers offer electronic home-based supports, and this is just coming online, but there are all kinds of cool things, and you can watch all the neat sorts of documentaries and videos online about stoves that automatically shut themselves off over time, and doors, you know, like someone with cerebral palsy who may be able to be alone overnight for the most part, but then this was a challenge for someone. They couldn't get up in the morning to let their caregiver into their locked apartment. So we had to pay for overnight staff for them that they didn't want, and it was very expensive. So things like a camera or monitor in their room so they can see who is at their front door and decide whether or not to electronically open the locks and buzz that person in, right? So there's all kinds of cool things that are out there, and more evolving every day, as you can imagine. Assistive technology. So that's up to $5,000 a year for devices that assist with safety and communication. I would say like communication devices like iPads and communication software are what I see requested here way more than anything else, though it could be different things. Crisis-based supports, so either we come to you where you are having your crisis, or you go off-site and come to us, and we help you work through your crisis and get that resolved. A community guide service, which is to kind of help promote community relationships and build some natural supports, and then we're trying to roll out this non-medical transportation. Different thing. Leave that aside. All right, so then kind of here's our other little sprinklings of services, and you can see these are kind of like all over the map with different waivers, but if you need nursing, there's some nursing options, there's some therapeutic consultations available. Transition services for people who are leaving nursing homes or institutions. For the most part, this doesn't apply to people, but in these kinds of rooms, but if you have someone who, for example, is in a hospital, like has a car accident, you know, or a stroke or all kinds of other things that happen to anybody, and they end up in a rehab facility or that hospital for a long period of time, the waiver has additional funding to help get them back home into the community, which is a great thing to know about. Okay, and so for a lot of the services, just a side note, we talk about, like, you can have someone in your home to help you, isn't that great? And as someone who has someone in their home to help with their kids often, kind of it's great, right? Like, I wouldn't want to not choose who that person is, but that model, that idea of I want to choose exactly who this person is, I want to place an ad, I want to hire them, I want to set their rate of pay, I want to interview them, I want to be a part of that more consumer-directed services, right? So it tends to be a lot more work upfront and even on an ongoing basis to maintain things, but people tend to really love their consumer-directed staff, which you hired someone who you felt like was a custom fit for the person with a disability. Some of the most successful ads I ever saw placed for consumer-directed attendance were focused upon the interests of a person with a disability. Like, I need someone high energy who is willing to run around all day and go out into the community. Also, you gotta be comfortable with people on the spectrum. Or I need someone who's cool with trains. Who's cool with talking about trains, watching train videos, playing with trains, doing trains. Because I have a subject matter expert on trains. Also must be comfortable with people with disabilities, right? If you get someone who also loves trains and wants to talk about trains all day, they will want to come to work. They are way more likely to form a natural bond, right? Those kinds of relationships tend to be really successful. Agency-directed care is care, what it sounds like, kind of overseen by an agency. So instead of placing an ad and saying this is who I need and when I need them and the hours I need them, you would work with an agency and say, here are the hours of support we need and the services we have to have this person provide. You all hire and train someone to do this. In my experience, agency-directed care attendants tend to have a lot more of a background in elder care, which is just a bigger industry than the developmental disability community. So some families blend them and say, for example, like Monday through Friday from 3 to 8 p.m., my kid's home and we're not home from work, someone has got to be there and someone has got to be arranging for their own backup because I'm doing my thing. We're going to use an agency for that time. But on the weekends, when we've got our 3 other kids going all over the place, but my loved one with a disability really wants to go do their train thing or do whatever it is that's important to them, that's a time when we would like to hire this person, right? So there's kinds of ways that you can go back and forth between those. All right, now after all this ado, now that we're so fired up, let's talk about how we apply for the waiver. Okay, so here are our screening numbers, and Melissa, I'll have you jump in here. The screening number for Loudon has just changed, so do you want to shout it out to the room?
Oh, absolutely. So it hasn't changed. It's a new number.
A direct number.
It's a direct number. So, hi everyone. My name is Emily Gebhardt. I'm the program manager for sport coordination at Loudoun County. So I oversee Loudoun County's waiver program. So for those of you who have not been screened, who are interested, this number on here gets you to the switchboard, who would then connect you to our mailbox, or now you can call us directly. And so the number is 703-777-0597. And what that's going to get you is our pre-recorded intake line. It's Spanish and English. There's 5 of us in the county that do these VIDE screenings that she mentioned. So each of us have a day to check the line. So whoever checks the line on the day that you call will be the person to contact you to set up your screening. So you just have to call once. It's checked every day. And we'll get back to you, and we can either come to you to do the screening, if that's easier, or you can always come to us. Either Leesburg or Sterling, either one.
Okay, cool. So if you're applying for one of these 3 developmental disability waivers, like Melissa said, don't call for the screening. Usually they send some paperwork that you fill out, right? What's your address? Do you have some kind of proof that you have a disability? You do, I assure you. If you're a parent with a disability, you've got plenty of proof that person's. And you'll do that VIDES assessment that we talked about. All right, for the CCC Plus waiver, you're calling your local Department of Social Services for intakes. The number for Loudoun's on here. And this is different, yeah. Do you want to
You
jump
actually, in Loudoun, the health department does a screening for children. So anybody 18 and under, you would call, I can give you that number. The person who does the screening for Loudoun for children is Caroline Bannerton. And her number is, and I just sent this to Eileen so she can send this out as well too. So her direct number, so again, under 18, 571-285-3605. Caroline Bannerton. So she's a nurse within Loudoun County Health Department, and she will come typically to your home. That's usually easier for families with younger kids to do your screening. And then for anybody 18 and over, then yes, you call DFS.
So like Melissa said, for the DD waiver, you're calling and you're leaving this message, right? When you call and you leave that message, you should feel like, I did something today, right? I spent 45 seconds placing this phone call with my name and contact information, and I started this wheel turning. For the CCC Plus waiver, allow a little bit more time. So on this phone call, someone should live answer the phone in an ideal world and start asking some basic screening questions there on the phone. So I feel like it's always helpful to have a list of diagnoses, doctors you see, prescribed therapies, prescribed therapeutic supports and medications, all those kinds of things in front of you. Because our brains can all get scrambled, and as parents we tend to do a very poor job of giving ourselves credit for all of the things that we do. So if you see it there in front of you, it decreases the odds that on this screening call, when you're talking to someone you've never talked to, and all of a sudden you're deep into these questions, that you're going to remember all of those kinds of pieces. So if that phone screening goes well, they'll send out a nurse to your home who will ask you very similar questions in person, and then they'll say, congratulations, we're going to start the enrollment on this waiver because this waiver has no waiting list. If you go to the DD waiver route, we'll talk about navigating that waiting list now. So, as of 2016, all of the DD waivers now have a shared waiting list, and obviously the first question you ask when you hear waiting list is like, how long? And it's like, I do this all the time, and I can't really give you an answer because it's really unpredictable. It's based upon a lot of factors, but the primary factor is urgency of need. So, if you put a young, healthy child with two very involved parents, one of whom works from home, and the other of whom is not employed, and they have really great supports around them, and everything's going really well, they're going to be very low on that urgent list. But if you call about someone who's having medical challenges or behavior challenges that you're having a really hard time meeting, or we're in a situation where one or both caregivers are no longer able to do this, maybe they've got their own health issues or other kinds of things going on, maybe you have multiple children with disabilities in the household, you've got lots of balls in the air, you're going to be higher up on that list. So when you're screened by the Community Services Board, they'll put you into, we'll talk about this in just one second, into one of three categories. So you have a little bit of a sense of where you are on that list, and people move between it often. So for example, you put a child on that waiting list and everything's really stable, and 6 months down the road, maybe puberty hits, and behaviors hit, because behaviors hit for all people with puberty, and people with developmental disabilities tend to get that doubly so. Give them a call back and tell them that things are looking a little bit different for you. Slots are assigned, generally speaking, by a regional waiver slot assignment committee. So it's a group of volunteers who don't work for the CSB who look at things that people have put on their waiting list application, right? How, all those kinds of factors we talked about, age and health of the caregivers, the needs of this person with a disability, how are we meeting all of these needs, these kinds of pieces, and they do their very best to provide the Community Services Board with their rank order of like, here's who we think should most get waivers, right? So there's a lot of subjectivity in that, understandably. There should be emergency or reserve waiver slots for when adult or child protective services is involved, suddenly both parents die. I mean, like the truest of true emergencies, like everything's on fire, things are absolutely out the window. All right. So repeat.
Is one of the criteria at all no matter if the child is getting ready to graduate from high school?
Yeah, so for children up to age 27, the wording is if you're transitioning out of school towards some kind of independent living option, you can be placed on priority 1 status. That's one of the check boxes that you over here. As someone who sees multiple CSBs across the region and the state, that moving to independent living supports component of that criteria is interpreted a little bit differently from some place to another. But if you were saying, yes, my adult child is exiting school or has exited school, right, so we're looking at like 22-ish to 27-ish, and they don't want to live here anymore, or I can't have them live here anymore, we are looking at a plan to do that, you should fall into that category. But if you say, they're stable at home, they want to be here, and I want them to be here, who are likely not going to fall into that category. So it's not just that age, it's the like, and I want to go do something different kind of with my life sort of thing. And you don't have to say this is exactly where they're going to live or what that's going to look like or all those kinds of pieces, but it's really the, we are looking at them no longer staying in the family home forever. So people on the waiting list are put into one of 3 priority tiers. This wording was put out by the state, and I just find it, like, frankly offensive. Like, priority 1 needs services within a year. But, like, you're already in some kind of urgent need within a year. And what other kind of system do we say, oh, you're really vulnerable? Oh, you're in a crisis? 365 days-ish, right? Right? No problem. But also no guarantee. So it could be many years, right? So I just feel like this is such a wash. So, like, I put it up here because I feel like it's important to understand you're going to see that wording. That's not a promise of anything, or in many cases, an accurate depiction of your need. The ARC works really, really hard on advocacy, and between 2018 and 2019, half of this priority 1 waiting list is going to be funded, and we have lots of promises and wishes and pushes to fund the other half in 2020. So that would be amazing. However, the General Assembly's ability to do that depends upon how much Virginia is bringing in the budget, and the political will of anybody in the General Assembly, with a side note that the entire General Assembly is up for election in November of this year. So we could be looking at a very different group of people by the time we get to January, right? So there are lots of factors in trying to figure out how long is the wait going to be, because in years where we fund a ton of waivers, the waiting time on average goes way down, and in years where we fund very few, the waiting time extends back out, right? The next plan after that is to start tackling priority 2, and then eventually down to priority 3. But essentially in Virginia, no one on these lower categories can be served until we've offered services to everybody in the priority 1 category. Logically makes sense, right? That's why we put people in these priorities. So for a little bit of perspective, there are just about 12,000-ish people on the waiting list now statewide. This year, 982 of them are going to get funded. So I am thrilled for this 1,000-ish people. And I'll say 1,000-ish because having offered people waivers in the past in the old system, you'll call some people on that waiting list and they'll say, you know what, we've given up and we moved to Florida, which is also a terrible place to live for disability services. But we have decided we're going another route, or you know, we're not going to do it at this time because we're just about to get stationed abroad for the Foreign Service. So I mean, all kinds of things happen. So when this many waivers go out, the waiting list moves down a little bit further than that. And every single year across the state of Virginia, about 250-ish people give up their waivers, move out of the state, pass away. Otherwise, that waiver turns over. So that waiver stays in the system. So this year, 982 new waivers are coming out, but that, plus the people who kind of turned it down initially, plus those turnover waivers, should get us essentially through the priority 1 waiting list. Again, to your question about waiting times, it's so fuzzy. It's so very, very fuzzy. So what can you do while you are on the waiting list? If you happen to have medical needs, you can apply for that CCC Plus waiver. And you can use it in at least that limited menu of services for as long as you have it. And the day you get the DD waiver, you will transition. You'll say, I'm giving this one up, and I'm going to use all the services on the DD waiver. Because as we saw in those service charts, anything that CCC Plus waiver offers, the DD waiver has, and then some. Right, so you'd never be losing a service by making that transition. Some counties can offer limited local funds, so if you call the CSB and say like, we're having a crazy